Hi there, and welcome to the next in the series of our RPA webinars. This is how to unlock RPA with process discovery. My name is Craig Willis. I'm Customer Success Director at Skore. Skore is a process mapping and analysis software designed to engage users within an organization and get people on board with business change and transformation. We do process discovery, we generate insights and support organizations through continuous improvement. With me today is Daniel Lawrence.
Hi Craig, thank you very much for joining us today at our sunny offices in Woking. My name is Daniel Lawrence, the Managing Director for Lawrence and Wedlock, and we deliver automation solutions and services for our clients from small to large, anyone who wants to automate processes from the very basic up to the more complex.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here today. So, why process discovery? Well, process discovery, certainly from our point of view at Skore, is all about getting buy-in and engagement from people across the organisation. So we use three terms to talk about the benefits of doing process discovery. We talk about getting alignment. So this is all about getting people to have a shared understanding of the work that happens within the organisation and the scope of a potential project or change they're about to embark on. We talk about opportunities. So what are the opportunities for improvement? What do we see in the process that we could improve and make things better tomorrow? Maybe it's to do things faster, deliver more quality or a better customer experience. And just as important as those two things, it's understanding the constraints that we have to operate within, because these are often the things that might slow us down or trip us up later on. So having clarity and alignment on those constraints is essential. Daniel, from your perspective, and certainly looking at RPA, why would process discovery be particularly important in this space?
Yeah, so I guess from our perspective, to build any automation at all, any robots, we always have to have a very clear understanding of what the process is today. All too often, what we face when we first engage with our clients is typically someone from maybe the IT organisation, for example, who's been tasked with finding a solution to a problem, and we find out that actually the engagement across the right stakeholders hasn't always happened, and that's what we really like about using Skore, because it takes it to the actual business user. It's a very much a democratized approach, which lends itself really well to where RPA is going. So we engage with the business and we find out truly who are the people that are really involved in the process and performing the activities. But more importantly, what Skore helped to weed out is who are the providers to the process, who provides the inputs, but who are the customers. And that's the other part we really bolt on to what we do in discovery is who's the actual customer. And what do they receive from the process? Because too often what we find, if we don't get enough people engaged, is that we work through a process and find that, yeah, that's the perfect way to automate it. That looks great. We've eliminated some steps and simplified. And we find out actually at the end of it that the customer didn't really want that at all. And it's just one of those long-lasting legacies of process where, it's always been done that way and that's what we've used. But ultimately, there might be a different way altogether, or a smarter way. So from our perspective, when we embark on automation, it's always nice to know that we've got the right people engaged in the process and get them collaboratively engaged on it so that they can help define, well, actually what we really need is this, not what we've historically got, and we don't need all that information, so we can save ourselves a lot of time and trouble within the process as well as automating it.
So when you talk about sort of getting engagement and bringing these people along on the journey, can you explain a little bit about how do you actually go about the process discovery or the process capture piece?
Yeah, certainly. So someone always comes to us first of all with we've got 3 or 4 processes that we think might be suitable for automation, and at that point we like to take a bit of a step back. It's always good first to understand the why, because this is something that's all too often sort of bypassed, I guess, to a degree. Someone comes very much with a solution in mind for a particular problem, but we like to take it a few steps back, because often you find out a little bit more about the organisation at the wider, higher level, you might find actually that there's a lot more value to be had elsewhere. We've sort of collaborated on 1 or 2 projects where we found exactly that. So we take the process back up a little bit. What we tend to do is, okay, we understand the nature of the tasks that you say you want to automate, but we like to take it up to its highest level within a process, or I guess what you typically would call the level 1, level 0 of what's the end-to-end first, give us an overall context on the process of where this particular activity fits in. And at that higher level, we can also understand, okay, well, who's actually involved in this? Who owns the process? Who are the people involved in delivering and performing it? But also, who are the providers to it? So who provides the source data, whether that's an internal or an external source, and who they are and what they provide and what format they provide it in. But also then from the customer's point of view, if it's an internal customer or an external one, what they receive and how they're using it. So by taking it up to that highest level, we get an overall appreciation before we get stuck down in the weeds of the detail. And yes, this is exactly the steps that, because we often find actually especially with things like reporting, for example, people produce reports because they've always been produced. And a lot of the time we find out actually, we do a bit of an inventory on those reports. Well, actually, there's 2 people providing that same report. They sit opposite one another. And they go into the same place, and neither of them are actually being used for any useful purpose. So it's all very well to say, yes, let's automate this process, but we tend to also look at what can we eliminate, standardize, or simplify, as well as automate. Yeah. And that's really where our process discovery starts, is to making sure that we're not embarking on something. Yes, it could be automated and save a lot of time, but we want to make sure that we're adding value at the same time. So that's where we take that step back.
I think that's really funny that if you've seen this so many times, activities or work happening within a process that's just is unnecessary for some reason. Historically, that piece of work has become redundant, but people have stopped asking why it needs to happen and why it's there in the first place.
It's path of least resistance, I guess, isn't it? Just get me the report.
Exactly, and that's one of the things that we've always been trying to address with Skore. The framework that we've built into the product is designed to challenge people and make them think about how stuff happens in the organisation today, so that they stop just blindly doing things because that's the way it's always been done around here.
Absolutely.
And start to question themselves on it.
And I think there's a in terms of certainly where some of the vendors are going in the market now, there's a lot of process mining companies coming out and talking about process discovery. A lot of that, I think, is coming from the RPA sector, because everyone's saying, well, that's great, you've got some great products out there, automate processes, but how do we understand what needs to be automated in the first place? And that question's been asked for the last 12, 18 months. And that's when, I guess, we've been working together a lot, because I went into the marketplace and really there wasn't anything there that actually facilitated that. So that's why we use Skore. But that question now is being asked more and more frequently, and every event I go to, it's not necessarily about the product anymore. It's what can automate what. They all do very similar things. What we're finding, the conversation consistently comes back to, how do we understand what needs to be automated? How do we capture that? And how do we build a pipeline of those opportunities that everyone can see and understand? And that's more and more things are going that way in conversations we have with clients.
Well, I think on that note, let's have a look at how it works. I think we should take a walkthrough of a typical project, typical
Absolutely.
process that we might look to automate. So we'll pick up an example here. We're going to look at this is not an uncommon process. All organisations will have some sort of procurement or procure to pay process. So from some sort of request to buy a product or service within the organisation through to paying that vendor or supplier. And in this example, we're going to look specifically at some of the detail, and we're going to look at the supplier onboarding piece. But essentially, the steps that we recommend that an organisation go through, the steps that you guys would take, you're going to start off, as you said, Daniel, people are going to come to you with a set of suggested processes, potential candidates for RPA. So you need to go and capture that process. We would then apply the Skore Robotic Assess tool to that to understand which of those, or help filter out which are the best for automation. We'll look at quantifying the steps so we can understand the business case. We'll review a pipeline of opportunities for applying the technology, and then look at how we capture the keystroke level detail, and then what we build off the back of that. So Skore's very much built around a particular framework for capturing or describing and capturing business processes, which is maybe different to what people have been used to traditionally, because again, what they do is they would take something that's very sort of free form, the whiteboard and sticky notes I mentioned before.
Blank board, start from scratch.
Exactly. That's fine. It's a good exercise. It's very interactive, but actually, it requires someone with a huge amount of expertise and experience of doing that to get the most out of, ask the right questions and take people along the right journey. What we tried to do with Skore is build a framework that essentially helps you along that journey. So it asks you the questions you go. It's not overly complicated. We've kept the shapes very simple. So there's not a huge amount of syntax to learn when you use it. It's here's a box that describes an activity that happens and an outcome that work delivers. So with our, in our example with procure to pay, you can see here is a very high level process that's describing the key things that are happening. So somebody somewhere has a requirement for a new service or some sort of goods. So they're going to create some sort of requisition. They're going to order those goods. They're going to get invoiced. So the organisation is going to be invoiced. Those suppliers or vendors are going to be paid, and so on. So you can see this is a very high level view of that entire end-to-end process.
I like the way actually that Skore sort of it takes the expert out of the process. Like too many people, I think we've done years of consulting and these types of workshops like you said about, and all too often people, if you get someone with a little bit of expertise in the room, they start asking about what sort of process methodology we're using, whether it's lean or something else, or what level it is, in terms of, is it level 1, 2, 3, 4 design, and there's so many different methodologies and taxonomies you can get hung up on. And basically what you want to do is get a bunch of business users in the room, people who actually do tasks and talk about the pain of where things work and where they don't and why. So I like the fact that Skore sort of removes the expert from the room requirement, if you like. So we obviously do some of that expertise, and some of the approaches that we take sort of two general approaches with this as well. Is one where because a lot of the time the people we work with are real business users, so we work with, for example, people in a service centre in Manila or Sofia, and we sort of say, right, you own the process or you work on the process. We introduce them to a system which literally takes minutes. It's very easy to pick up, it's very intuitive, and we, rather than holding them for a load of time, they're busy people, we sort of say, here's the initial training. We sort of give a rough guidance on, right, we're going to agree this is the scope of what we're trying to capture, and we let them go away and do it. And what you end up with then is a very real, tangible and very realistic view of this is what actually happens, as opposed to you get some of the wrong people in a room, for example, or on a call, and they tell you what ought to happen. And then it stems to become very structured and very forced and not really, a little bit artificial, really. So we do sort of both, but the ones we find most effective that lead into the RPA piece is when we actually give the real users the tool and say, right, what we need, describe the process for onboarding suppliers, for example. And they'll give you a very real, often very detailed, which is great because that's what we need to build the bots anyway. But they give you a very real picture of this is what truly happens. And they'll add real timelines and quantities to it, because they have a better feel than anyone for what really happens on a day-to-day basis. And that's why we really use it, and that's the most successful way that we use it as well, because they'll know who they get inputs from. They'll talk about those. They'll know who's using that. They won't necessarily know why the customers use it, but sometimes the blank spaces on the chart are more revealing than the ones that are written in detail.
Indeed, and I guess often what happens, we certainly see this in many different areas, is that you'll have one person. You mentioned before about two people producing reports and sitting opposite each other. Quite often you have two people sat next to each other and they're not even fully aware of what each other does, and yet they each sit in a different part of the same process and interact. And so having a better understanding what each other does and where they fit in the overall process helps, just in terms of how they interact with each other, levels of trust, all of those sorts of things. And that's what this does here, is although it's very, very high level in terms of a process, it gives that framework onto which everybody in the team or the group can start to fit the different bits together. So you talked before about often with an RPA project, people come with suggestions of these are the potential candidates. So having this conversation makes sure you've got the whole team aligned, and then they can start to work out where those candidates fit, and actually do they interact with each other, and are they part of the same process, or are they completely different things altogether? And the way we support that in Skore is when we take a high level like this, you can see we have what we call the detailed view, which allows us to take a piece of the process and break it down into more detail. So if I take, in our example, we wanted to look at the onboarding of vendors or suppliers. So here we've got source and onboard. I can click the detailed view, and we drill down into that detail, so we can see the next level of detail here. So we can see the steps now that take place. And it's still quite a high level, right? We've still got identifying our vendors. We're going to select the vendors, and then we're going to onboard them once we've got them.
Yeah, I think the thing is it naturally finds the right levels. That's the beauty of it. Without getting hung up on terminology or anything else, you just let business people who do the process talk about and describe what they do. It naturally falls out into levels that make sense. That's what I find.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, that thought process that people go through, because you'll often get people in the session. You'll get somebody who thinks very, very high level. They'll describe procure to pay process in 5 steps.
Yeah.
But the next person in the room will think about it in a very low level. Now, there's no right or wrong. It's just the different way that people naturally come at these things. Yeah. So that low level person will think of it as, well, I come into the office in the morning, I log into my computer, I open this system, I do this. And they're they're opposite ends of the scale, but you've got to reconcile them in the room, and that's what happens when they go through this exercise of they all get to talk about what they do, but you then get to put it into these different layers, and everyone and then says, "Oh, now I know. Now I see what you're talking about."
Yeah. My favourite one is, "Oh, is that really what you do?" That's the favourite quote that you tend to hear.
So what we'll do then is we take the onboard the new vendors we said in the example, and I can go down into another level of detail here. And what we're going to start to see here on this level is where we've applied our robotic assess module to the process. And so what the robotic assess module does is it's trying to help the team to understand, well, which of those activities or candidates that we've suggested really are suitable for applying something like robotic process automation. And what we do is, as well as describing or discussing the process with the team, we essentially apply a set of questions, and we look at each step in the process, and we try to understand, is this something that is a very human-based decision-making process, or is it something that's driven by rules and standards and therefore is more suitable for automation?
Yeah, and the why boxes are great, because after years of running these types of workshops, the one thing we always used to ask to every statement of an activity was why. So he always says, well, on a Thursday at 10 o'clock we do this. And the question we always ask to try and understand it more is, well, why do you do that? And often you find out that there's a blank on there on that diagram at some point, because no one really knows why they do it. It's Thursday at 10 o'clock, so we're doing it. So that's what I like about the way that this works too, is it drives out the true why nature of this.
Indeed.
Yeah.
On the screen you can see that the boxes are different colours. So that what's happened is where we've gone through that sort of questioning or interrogation, what we're able to quickly work out is the green boxes essentially represent those that are most suitable for applying some sort of automation. The orange boxes are telling us that there's potential for automation, but we might need to do some sort of further investigation. So it might be that we have to iron out, the data might be coming in slightly unstructured format. It's not that it's not available in a structured format, it's just it's not there today, and we might need to go and look at where that comes from. And then the grey boxes are the ones that are going, do you know what, these are probably they are human-based processes. They're probably never going to be automated, or not in the near future. It's not something that we're going to consider right now. Yeah. What we do then is we've got at the top we've got a tab which we call the Assess tab, and if I open that up, it gives us a very, very quick overview of those steps. So we've looked at this in a very simple single diagram view, but if you've got lots of these processes, or different processes or different pieces of the process, and you've applied this across that, you can then start to get a good picture of, what sort of percentage of this process might I be able to automate? I mean, we can see here it's all evenly distributed at the moment, but even then we're saying out of these 6 steps on this particular part of the process, 4 of those could be automated, and we've got 2 that are probably going to remain manual for the time being. But it also draws out, and you will have seen on the process diagrams at each step, we'll have identified 1 or more resources or roles that are responsible for carrying out that work. So straight away, we can start to see which of those roles is going to be most impacted by any type of automation that we do on the process. I'm going to jump back to the process view, and I'll drill back down into our onboarding new vendor. The other thing that we would look to do in these processes is actually start to understand the volume of work that's flowing through. So on a daily basis, how many times is this process happening? And how long does each step take? We'd look at the roles and start to think about what is the fully loaded cost, annual cost of this type of role in the organisation. Because once we started to capture that type of information, we can then build a business case. And this is all of this information is generally done in the workshop while we're talking to the group. So we're capturing the process, we're understanding who does it, why they do the steps they do, whether they can be automated, and how long and how often are they happening. So on the business case tab, we can very, very quickly start to see what's the total cost of this particular process. We can, if we are to automate the steps that we've identified as the green and the oranges, what's the potential cost saving based on the role costs in this process. We can also demonstrate the full-time equivalents, so we can see what's the impact in terms of the number of people involved in this particular process.
Yeah, and that's the one that you never sort of think that the number of the value is the one that everyone wants to know about, and it's good, and certainly everyone in procurement or anyone in finance and accounting who's sort of signing off on the business case of the project wants to know. But ultimately what the business truly want to know is that second number, which is the FTE. So in terms of actual saving of time, what does that mean to us? And that's the one that from a business point of view becomes really important, because in reality what we find, at least with RPA still, is no one's really losing their jobs as a result of this. It's about how much time do we get back to support the business or the customer better. So that number for us, having those 2 numbers on there is really, really important.
So what we're doing here is we're looking specifically at one piece of a fragment of a process, if you like, or one process within the organisation. Of course, robotic process automation doesn't get applied just to procure to pay, or even in terms of vendor onboarding, it can be applied anywhere. So one of the tools we provide here is the ability to then roll up and look at all of the opportunities that we've identified in terms of a pipeline of opportunities. So what we do is we go back to what we call the workspace level within the product, and we can open the portfolio view, and this shows us all of the opportunities we've identified in this particular organisation. And we can see a prioritised list of those processes and the potential
returns and the benefits. Yeah.
So once we've got that information in there, obviously we might want to do is sort it, look at it in a different way. So just by clicking the column headings, obviously we can then start to see what's the total potential size of the benefits for each one. And what that allows us to do is to prioritise and then start to pick off the candidates that we want to tackle first. So once you've identified the potential candidate you're going to automate, we then want to go back and start to go to the next level of detail and start to look at how we're actually going to automate them. So back in our process view, what we can now do is start to take our candidates that we've identified and drill down into more detail to look at how the automation is actually going to work. So Daniel, could you...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so at this point, we've sort of gone through the whole discovery, we've gone through the prioritization, and we've selected what's going to be delivered effectively within that next time period ahead. working with the same people who were involved in building up all of the process maps, and especially the people who are, at the real level, they're actually working at screenshots and they're actually doing the transactions. It's those folks that we work with to capture the keystroke level of detail. So what we do is when we build a bot, we very much work at that workflow keystroke level, building up workflows and codes. So at that point, that's where we really need the detail. And what we find invaluable is not only the detailed description that comes from the person in terms of what they're doing, why they're doing it, what systems they're using. What we're able to do is append a screenshot to that, a keystroke screenshot, to make sure that as you're looking at, as you go into a particular screen, you log into a particular screen. Things can be in different places. Certainly, as we work in building bots in different environments, for example, maybe between a development and a UAT and a production environment, having that sort of production live view of a screen and where certain things are on that screen, where the layout is, where selectors are, helps our developers a lot when we actually come to the build, because we often find that there's a little bit of a synchronization issue between different environments, and things that are in one place on one environment are not necessarily in the same place. So having this production level view really helps our guys as they come to build the bots. So we, working with the individual process SME, will walk through the detail and make sure we fully understand the nature of what's happening, and then at the same time capture that screenshot, drag it and drop it on there, and then the guys will use this as they go out and then build the bots on pretty much a live and real-time basis.
And we can now have a look at an example of this in practice.
That's right. So taking the scenario that we started with as procure to pay, and we worked down into the onboarding. One of the onboarding steps on the process was to go off and do a company's house search. And this is something we find in a lot of procurement processes, but not just here as well. We might find it in the legal industry and the online gambling industry and lots of others, where they want to do a bit of a background search on a particular company. They want to know if they're still valid, what their registration number is. They might want to dig into some of the actual financials submitted to do a bit of a credibility assessment. They might want to look at the offices and how many are involved and who those individuals are, if you wanted to do certain background checks on any of those. So there's a lot of activities, again, that can fall off of this one process in itself, but the one that we've captured here and built a robot for is the actual going into the company's house website, doing a search and extracting those records, putting it in what we've done in this case, we put it into an Excel sheet and then emailed it to the requester just to keep it simple.
And this is typically something that's done very, very manually today.
Very much so, yeah.
But very, very standard.
Yeah. So the start point for this process is that the trigger can come from any place. It could come from an email from someone saying do a background check on this company, with a number of companies listed out in the body of the email. It could come from a spreadsheet that the robot sweeps to see if any new items have been added to go off and perform the search. There's a number of ways it can use this. It could come from a CRM system or anything really. But in this case, it's triggered from an email from someone saying, please perform a search on this company. And the robot sees that, reads the email, and then it goes off and does the search on the company's house website. So it just goes to the site, which is public, of course. It navigates to the search the search field, puts the name of the company requested, and it might find multiple. So if it finds multiple, unless it's something to the contrary, it'll do a search on everything. So it's a bit of defining the criteria really as to what you want to do, but the robot will read that, put the search criteria into company's house, search for and find that company. And then what it does is it selects based on the criteria of I want to find the registered address, I want to find the company registration number, I want to know the main names of all the directors and secretaries for that company, and then put all that into one sheet, send it back to the requester. So that's exactly what the bot that we built does. We actually, I think, set it somewhere around the region of 20, 30 actual names. And the criteria we gave it was anything with Microsoft in the title, and you see it here. It's actually flicking through. This is actually we've actually slowed this down, but this is the robot actually in the company's house site, plugging in all of the names, and then just going through and copying the data out that's requested. And then once it's done that, it's building up all of those search criteria in a temporary memory file. Rather than going into the spreadsheet one by one, it's building them up in memory, and then at the end, it copies all of those into a spreadsheet, and then that spreadsheet is returned to the requester.
So the difference between, in the old days, the user or procurement coordinator in our example here would have had to sit there and log into Companies House. They would have had to put the search criteria in, whatever it was, 10, 20 times.
Yeah, go to each tab time,
download.
manually copy and paste, because there isn't a simple download sort of function on it.
And now what they do is they write an email with the search criteria to the robot, and whatever it is, 30 minutes or 15 minutes later, they get an email back with that information. So in the meantime, if they do have to wait, they're going off and doing something else, more, less manual, if you like, and then come back, they can get on with the next step.
There's a couple of ways you can do that. So when you've got bigger companies with high volumes of these, we tend to run these in more of an unattended fashion, where at certain points in the day, the robot will run offline, lights out sort of fashion, and just go off and return all the results and update certain fields or systems. And in smaller companies, or even just on an ad hoc basis, you could have it a bit like a macro, where you sort of hit the button to run the Companies House search, and it'll go off and run it and return it to you there and then on the screen. So there's a couple of different ways that we tend to deploy these.
I think that covers at a very high level, but the sort of end-to-end flow of how we'd go through the process discovery steps, build a business case, and then actually build the automation. I guess just on one last thing, Daniel, is there any piece of advice that you'd give anyone who was picking up Skore for the first time to run process discovery for RPA?
Yeah, I mean, in a word, I would say yes. It's simple. And it is easy, and I guess that's the great thing about this, is you don't have to be a business analyst, you don't have to be a major experience in being able to pick up this tool and intuitively use it. It's very, very simple for anyone to use, no matter what your background, no matter what field you work in. It's really easy for a team of business users to collaborate, document what it is that they do today, and for other people in the organisation, stakeholders, to understand that and see that very simply as well, because it's so shareable and collaborative.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Contact details if you'd like to learn any more about Skore or robotic process automation. Those details are on the screen now. And Daniel, thank you again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you or hearing from you on the next session.
Thank you, Craig.